Hi there, and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm B.C. Cloutier, President of Action for Life, and this is Father Michael Orsi. Nice to see you, Father, as always.
Always a pleasure, my man.
I thought today, this might seem a little weird, but I thought we'd talk about fear.
We've been weird before.
Yeah, probably some of the viewers think so. I thought we'd talk about fear. I wanted to start with a passage from St. Paul's letter to Timothy. He said, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." I don't know. I realize God gave that to us, but it seems to me in this environment that there's an awful lot of fear coming from a whole lot of different places. Traditional media, legacy media, social media certainly, and just the way we treat each other.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
First of all, let me say, St. Paul is right on. Fear is of the evil one. It immobilizes us.
Right.
And if we're afraid, you know as well as I do that we can't do anything. And I think, my first reaction is when you're afraid as a child, what do? You put your head under the covers. You're afraid. You don't want something bad to happen to you. So fear is a way of immobilizing, and is a way of controlling people. When St. Paul talks, I'm sure he's reflecting on the life of Christ himself. And you remember there's that wonderful scene where Jesus is walking on the water, and St. Peter says, "Hey, Master, let me come to you." And Jesus says, "Okay, come on." And Peter begins to walk on the water until he got afraid.
Right.
And then he begins to sing, "Master, help me, help me." and Jesus helped him. Now, what's the key there? The key is if we keep focused on God, we're going to overcome the fears that we have. God will rescue us in the most difficult of situations. But oftentimes, when people are afraid, they really are not looking to God to rescue them. Now, fear is used to intimidate people,
Sure.
as I said. And this is especially true when we want to control a person, control a population. Let's talk about controlling a person. Familiar with the movie The Godfather? Suppose somebody from the Godfather's organization comes to you and tells you,
I'm going to make you an offer that you can't refuse.
and the next thing you do is, like Jackie Gleason, and you are probably going to certainly be afraid, but you might also acquiesce to the command. And you might even have some great fear in going to law enforcement. Certainly if somebody is threatening you, if somebody's trying to bribe you, somebody is trying to make you to do something that you don't want to do, you have to seek some help for that. Certainly, for most of us, the help would come maybe from parents, if you're a child. Might come from some friends. Say, "Hey, look, you got to help me out. I'm being threatened. I'm afraid." And it might come from law enforcement, and might come from an attorney. Sometimes people are intimidated because they're going to put a lawsuit on you, and lawsuits are frightening for most people, and they're costly.
And there's an example of fear being applied in order to reach an end.
Right.
The lawyer says, "We're going to sue you up and down.
Right.
You'll have nothing left when we're finished with
Right.
you." And fear takes over.
Yeah, I'm going to just say something, folks. This is no endorsement of former President Trump. No endorsement whatsoever. I'm just amazed at, how many people are, first of all, filing lawsuits against him, and how many indictments there are against him. And certainly if I were in his predicament, I might say, I'm scared. I want this to come to an end. So I don't know what he is made out of, but it's better stuff than that's inside of me to fight back under these terrible circumstances. How many indictments can one person bear to take? But the average person, let's face it, if we have attorneys coming at us and we are concerned about ourselves, our families, we very likely would back down.
Sure.
So you can control people through fear, intimidation. Lawsuits, they are intimidating, folks. They're intimidating. Okay, somebody who is in authority over you might intimidate you and say, "You better do this, or you're going to lose your job." And it might be something unethical. I've spoken to people who are involved, with different professions, and although they know something is not exactly ethical, if they're afraid of losing their job because they have a family to take care of, they might back down on that too. I had a young man, an attorney, as a matter of fact, worked for a firm, and he told me that the senior partners, when business was slow, would tell him to review the file. And of course, that costs money.
Sure.
And he told them he wouldn't do it. And he told them that he said, my soul is more important to me than a paycheck. Now, that's pretty courageous. That is pretty courageous. So I said to him, well, what did you do next? He said, I decided to leave the firm and start my own practice. So there are alternatives for some people. Some people, there might not be that easy of an alternative.
Right.
So it can intimidate individuals to get control over them, and sometimes to make them do things that they would not normally do or want to do if they were not being intimidated. Of course, it's no way for a human being to live to have something hanging over you and to be afraid. And fear is a terrible thing because what fear does, as I said, it immobilizes us, and it doesn't allow us to act freely. And God made us to be free. He made us to be free. And he wants us to act as free human beings. So any structure in society that limits freedom is sometimes very, very dangerous because it contradicts God's law. Now, let me be clear about this. We just can't do everything that we want to do either.
Sure.
So, in society, there are certain rules and regulations that we have to live by. And a little bit of fear is a good thing. I'll be very honest with you, because maybe if we didn't have a little bit of fear in us, maybe we would feel it's okay to shoplift. But there used to be a law against shoplifting. It's according to what state you live in now. There's a law. If I'm caught shoplifting, if I'm caught stealing, I am going to go to jail. So sometimes there's a good fear that, for the good of the community and for my own good, that I should be afraid. Let's talk about kids with their parents. My parents would say to me, don't do that, okay? Little kid, don't go in the street, all right? Now, kid goes in the street, the kid gets whacked on the bottom. I don't know if you can do that anymore. I got a couple of them, more than a couple. And the reason is, if you do this thing, you're going to get killed.
Right.
So sometimes, fear is a good thing. Also, to be afraid to commit a sin. Right? Why? And it's not always the best of reason, but we might say, I'm afraid that I'm going to go to hell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
sure.
So, there are a lot of things that can run through a human being's mind and say, I'd like to do that. But then you say, wait a minute, what are the consequences? The consequences are I've committed a mortal sin, a grave sin, and that I have the potential of going to hell because of it. And a lot of people aren't thinking about that today, that there is a penalty, there is a judgment. There does come a time when you got to pay back for the things that you did wrong. So sometimes fear can be a very, very good thing. Now, the ideal is that we do things because we're loving human beings, but most of us aren't always loving all the time. And therefore, we have to remind that there are consequences to bad actions.
And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Back right after this. Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events. Welcome back to a conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier. Father, we're talking about fear today.
Yeah, in the last segment we talked about, fear, how it impinges upon us personally, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad. And fear can be a good thing, but if we are being intimidated, and that certainly limits our freedom, what happens to a large population is similar, except you're dealing with a whole cohort, if you will, of people. It's more universal in how fear is being used. And certainly, politicians have used this, from the beginning of time.
Sure.
Let's just be straight about this. That's what the Romans did when they were crucifying people. It was not just to punish what they believed to be the criminal, but it was to strike fear in the population. And they would have the crucified people lined up on the main roads going into the towns. And the idea was, hey, if you buck Roman rule, you're going to end up the same way. And if that didn't scare somebody straight, I don't know what would. Now, how do we get control, or how do people get control of populations? We had a terrible example of this, certainly in Nazi Germany.
Sure.
The Nazis took over, National Socialism took over, and people were intimidated. And there were people who were literally victims to the Nazis. If they dared to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, these people were intimidated. They were beat up, they were jailed, they were killed. And so you'd have to think twice about standing up to a regime like that, an evil regime like that. And how many people, ended up, in concentration camps? How many ended up being murdered? I'm going to say they were murdered because they dared to open their mouth and say, hey, this is wrong. There was a great Protestant pastor, Lutheran pastor, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and a real heroic man, devout Christian. And he went back to Germany after having spent some time here in the United States to get out of there. But he said, I can't stay here. I have to go back. I have to do something to help my people. And he went back, and he was involved in the underground. He spoke out against the Nazis, and he was even involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Mm-hmm. And he was caught.
Ultimately lost his life, didn't he?
They hanged him just a few days before the Allies went in to liberate the camps. So, fear. And everybody knew that if you stepped out of line, your life was forfeit.
Now, before fear, there was apathy, I think.
Yeah, I suppose so. A lot of people don't get involved.
Well, and so let's fast forward to the 21st century. Mm-hmm. I realize that we're not to the point of Nazi Germany, and I don't mean to imply that we are.
That's the kind of the extreme.
But certainly there are some parallels that we should be aware of.
Yeah. Well, look, it's going on in some of the communist countries, certainly, China, Cuba, North Korea. You say something that is not considered to be favorable to the regime, you are going to end up in jail or to a re-education camp or dead. So it goes on today, and Kim Jong Un. He rules by fear. He rules by fear,
Sure.
and so does Chairman Xi, and so does the regime in Cuba. They try to scare people into silence, and unfortunately, it works most of the time. But there are heroes who do stand up and say, no more, no more, and. I think we also have to look at this in our own country as saying, well, it doesn't happen here yet. But it does happen. Not to the point of somebody being martyred or hanged or shot, but it does happen. You remember the COVID crisis?
Of course. There is all kinds of fear.
Yeah.
Trying to get people to perform based on fear.
Right. It was something that it was being imposed upon us day after day after day on the TV, the newspapers, the social media, that this COVID is going to kill you. So you better mask up. You better shelter in place. Stay in your house. Don't go to work. Don't go to school. Don't go to church. And people were so frightened.
They complied.
They complied. I mean, I tried not to comply. That's part of my personality. However, I can remember, you'd be walking down the street, like outside, broad daylight, the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, and somebody would see you passing, and they'd cross to the other side of the street.
Sure.
So neighbors were not even talking to each other. And you know what, folks? It caused a lot of damage, and the damage is still with us today. You have kids that, they've been damaged by it. They couldn't go to school. They lost their social skills. They lost their learning opportunities. And they have in some way been emotionally traumatized by the whole experience. And we still have some adults today that, are still, frightened about COVID, about catching a germ.
Let me give you another example of fear, Father. Cancel culture.
Oh, yeah.
People have to be very careful what they say on social media. And social media, let's face it, is a two-edged sword. There's good stuff and there's bad stuff. But people have to be very careful about stating an opinion, even when the opinion is genuine and true, because there are others who will, quote unquote, cancel them.
Right.
Again, fear. Not doing something out of fear.
Right. And, we have to, look, we're not all, Superman or, we're not all Donald Trumps that we could just keep taking it and taking it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Most of us, we kind of get worried when things are turning against us.
Sure.
But when we are dealing with these fear events, there has to be somebody that has to be able to stand up and say, hey, this is a lot of baloney, and be willing to take the hits. I mean, Dr. Fauci kept getting up again and again and again, and he kept talking about, we're going to die, the science says this, the science says that. People couldn't even go to the beach.
Right.
They were closed. I mean, this is how crazy this was. From my studies in biology, germs, they kind of die in the fresh air, don't they? That's what I thought.
I think.
And then sunshine,
otherwise, we'd all be dead by now.
Sunshine. But, there were certain people that did begin to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute. This is not exactly true, what you're saying. We have no evidence, for instance, that masks work.
Right.
We have no evidence that 6 feet apart works. So some people in the medical community, Dr. McCullough, for instance, he got up and he said, wait, this is crazy. And there's certainly something called herd immunity that,
that Sweden proved has validity.
Yeah. And we hear again and again people saying that the shot really didn't do that much good, and maybe it did some damage to even the shot. But the media, the White House, the politicians, get the shot, and a lot of us got the shot. I'm in the hospital quite often, and the hospital protocols, they wanted us to have the shot. They didn't force me, but I figured, hey, I'm here, I'm working with these people, and I should get the shot because Well, that's what they're doing here at the hospital. However, I did have COVID, but I didn't know I had it. How do you like that? They were giving out these COVID antibody tests, and I went to the COVID antibody test at the firehouse. And they said to me, okay, go stand outside. They took blood. And I went outside and I had to put down my car and my first name. So I put down Michael Kia. They come running out about 20 minutes later. Hey, who's Michael with the Kia? I said, here I am. Congratulations, you had COVID. Could we have your blood? So, a lot of people I think had it, didn't know they had it.
I think that's right.
Yeah. But we were scared.
Of course, I think we're all scared.
We were scared.
I mean, I went and I drove to Miami to get the shot.
Yeah.
What I'll say about it, with benefit of hindsight, I say two things. First of all, the majority of people here in Florida, really like our governor because he took a stand, and that could have turned out very badly for him. But also, I think that all this Fauci nonsense set back vaccines considerably. That people now don't want to get vaccinated for anything.
I know. Hey, look, folks, some vaccines, they're really great. I mean, like polio and diphtheria and measles, they're good for you. I mean, I've had them, thank God. I mean, so it's not all vaccines are bad, not all of them. But, that's up to you. I mean, you have free choice. I mean,
Thankfully, we do still have free choice.
Yeah.
We'll be back right after this. Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events. Welcome back to a conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier. Father, final thoughts today.
Final thoughts. I go back to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he's famous for saying, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up about fear. We talked about, that there is kind of a good fear that, keeps us in line. You have to have a little bit of fear in you. And then there's bad fear that immobilizes you. And we talked about how just as a child, we have to have a little fear that if we do something naughty, we're going to be punished for it. We also talked about how society has to have some fear in its citizens that if you commit a crime, you are going to be punished for that crime. Well, you used to be punished for that crime, folks. I don't know what they're doing anymore with it. But if you don't have that fear in you, you're going to have a dead child or you're going to have a chaotic society. And nobody is going to prosper in that. We're at a point now in our society, in certain cities, people are living in fear. They're afraid to go out of their homes. They're afraid to go shopping. They lock their doors. And this is certainly something that's very unhealthy for human beings. Good societies have safe societies. Society has to be safe. And when we're not safe, then we are fearful, and then we become less than human. You can't flourish if you're living in fear all the time. We do need heroes. Hey, folks, we need heroes. And when we do see someone who is doing something heroic, and I often think about our police, our military, these people are indeed heroes today. Shake their hands, congratulate them, thank them for their service. They deserve it. But there are other people who step up to the plate too at a difficult time and do something which, well, it might be unorthodox, it might be unexpected, it might even be something that, well, I kind of took a chance and I did something that, well, maybe the authorities don't like it, but it had to be done. And that's a heroic person, willing to take the lumps. Dr. King was just that kind of a person. You know,
Absolutely.
he knew what the rules and regulations were in the South, and he said, "I'm going to stand up for this." He ended up in jail numerous times, and he finally ended up being assassinated for taking the stand that he did. But you know, societies also intimidate their people. We talked about this, the COVID scare. We were an intimidated society, and it has a tremendous effect on people's psyche, and it is long term. Long term, the effect that takes place when somebody is living in a society that has them intimidated. This is the case with all the communist countries. These people live in fear. And all you have to do to go appreciate what fear can do is to go and, well, maybe not allowed into a communist society, but go and see the kind of life that they lead. It stifles all initiative. It stifles all kinds of creativity. It stifles everything that is beautiful about human nature. And so if you can sense that you are being intimidated to conform to what society says, well, then you have to stand up and say something about it, even if it's in a small group. You know, one of the great fears today, people are talking about, it's in the media all the time. Climate change, climate change. You have little kids, you know, they're worried about climate change. Look, we live in Florida. Folks, if you're here in Florida, and if you're in Syracuse, wherever you may be, it's hot. But it's been hot here forever. I mean, you know, it's nothing new. So when you hear about climate change, you have to also realize that this is a way of controlling a population, to get people to do what they want people to do, to live the way they want people to live, and to promote causes that they believe is good for the elite who are running society. One of the things that we find out about climate change is that, hey, folks, the weather does change. It does. The weather changes. And if you look at the charts, the historical charts about weather, and you look at all of the sediments where they can tell different layers of what the weather was like, they can see that over time the weather does change, and the sunspots, and there are volcanoes, and all of these things have an effect on the weather. But, you know, we're led to believe that, you know, our gas-burning stove is the culprit. I mean, we're in a sad state, folks. My mother used it all the time to cook, so I think my mother was probably a criminal today.
That's a topic for another time, Father. Thank you so much for joining us, and join us again next week for a conversation with Father Orsi. Same time, same place. Until then, have a great week and God bless.